everyone. In this video, I'm going to compare Canson Montval paper with Fabriano 1264. Both of these papers are aiming to offer artists a moderate price point and moderate quality without the expense of cotton rag paper like Arches. And both of these papers offer us their own characteristics. So I wanted to set up some tests that address what I think of as the usual problems with wood pulp paper. And I definitely agree that these are a set of problems that I've run into. I don't think people are exaggerating these issues. And so what I like to look at with wood pulp paper is how much of these problems are present when I use the paper. So the usual complaints that I run into are, one, that we don't get smooth gradients, smooth washes, and clean, clear transitions from one color to the next. The other complaint is that artist tapes, when you lift them up, take away some of the surface of the paper with them, and it's very difficult to tape a clean edge, remove the tape safely without any tearing or damage. Same thing with masking fluids, that they are notorious for tearing these sort of more mid-priced wood pulp papers. Another complaint is that you can't lift color once you put color down, whether it's staining or non-staining. It is very difficult to add some water, blot it with an absorbent material, and see the color lift away. Another problem is that layering on cotton paper will generally be a clean superimposition of one color over the next, which is what allows us to paint beautifully and to mix our colors optically and to have really interesting color interactions. On wood pulp paper, what tends to happen is that the paint sits right on the surface of your paper so that when you come in onto your dry painted layer with more water, what happens is the water tends to reactivate the paint underneath it, and then those colors mix physically, and you also get kind of a look of water damage with a lot of blooming and a lot of unwanted physical interaction between your water and your paint. Lastly, a lot of people have problems with these papers buckling. Now, I'm not the person to really ask about this because when paper buckles, I really don't care very much. It's either going to get flattened under some weights before framing. It's never been a big problem for me. But if that's the kind of thing that really concerns you, wood pulp papers tend to buckle a lot more than 100% cotton rag. So I set up some tests that measure all of these different painting situations. The first question I had was whether or not each painting surface would hold up to tape. I taped off a couple of strips for my testing overall. Next, I wanted to see how each paper would hold up to masking fluid. Now, I use Pebeo drawing gum, which tends to be pretty gentle on paper with proper use and adequate drying. For this test, I put some bar soap on my brush to protect the bristles from the masking fluid, and I painted the masking fluid in some vertical bars across one side of the stripe to the next. I did this for both the Montval and the Fabriano papers. While my masking fluid was drying, I wanted to explore how the paint interacts in a wet-on-wet gradient blend. I made a gradient on both sheets within a taped-off stripe, going from yellow to blue. While I painted, I noticed that the Fabriano 1264 was very thirsty. Paint didn't seem to sit on the surface for a long time at all, even though this paper is described as internally and externally sized. The transition from one color to the next wanted to dry out immediately, and the transitions in my painting all wind up having a visible edge between them. When using the Montval paper, I noticed that I had quite a bit more time to add my wet paint to my wet paint, and I noticed smooth transitions in color as long as the paper appeared damp. Now, this smoothness only became more apparent after my gradients had dried. To test the behavior of the masking fluid, I added a gradient going from red to purple across each swatch with my masking fluid on it once that masking fluid had completely dried. While this painting dried, I added more tape to form another swatch, and I played with some yellow and red and orange gradients. A common problem with wood pulp paper is the reluctance to release color and allow it to be lifted without the surface of the paper degrading and pilling. So I decided to test lifting some of this orange color with a nylon brush designed for lifting watercolor. I also used a bit of paper napkin and some water for a more traditional and more consistent lift. Below my swatch that I used to test lifting, as it dried, I added some swatches in each of my cyan, magenta, and yellow colors, intending to layer these colors and see how layers interact once these swatches had dried. What I discovered was that neither paper was very happy to be challenged with that scrubber brush. Both surfaces pilled and became quite damaged. When I used extra water and my absorbent napkin technique to lift some color, the Montval paper met me partway. The Fabriano really did not allow much lifting whatsoever. Each paper did allow the drawing gum to be pulled up using a rubber eraser-like tool which is made specifically for lifting masking fluid, and they allowed it without any tears or mishaps. When pulling up the tape, however, the tape did pull up the surface of the Montval paper in one part, and this is quite a concern because the tape that I'm using in this demo is a tape made for watercolor paper. It's got less grip than standard washi and masking tapes. So if you want to tape the edges of any work on Montval, tape very lightly. If you're using masking tape or washi, reduce the tack on it by touching the tape over your clothes a few times. And whatever you do, pull gently, pull slowly, and pull away from the edges of your work when it's complete. The Fabriano 1264 had no problem being taped and releasing the tape completely without the surface peeling away. I layered some color over all of my swatches to see how well paint layers on these papers. Paint tends to sit on the surface of wood pulp papers, and when you apply wet paint to dry paint, it will often dissolve the paint below and combine into a single layer with slightly water-damaged looks. In layering, I feel that the Montval paper gives a cleaner and more uniform wash of color. Now, both papers allow color to lay on top of color without too much re-wetting of the layers below, but I would use cotton paper if I wanted a smooth and uniform wash, and it really, really mattered. If I wanted a smooth and uniform layer on top of another area of color, then cotton paper is still sort of de rigueur. Last, a common concern with wood pulp paper is that they tend to buckle. Now, I didn't find that either of these papers buckled too much, not enough for me to find off-putting immediately, but you may want to have some bulldog clips so that you can attach any sketchbook pages down to the next and inhibit a little bit of the buckling. Other differences of note between these two papers. The Fabriano and Montval are priced nearly identically through Blick. Both of these are about $6.50 US for the small spiral-bound book. Canson Montval gives you 20 sheets of 140-pound paper with a lightly textured cold-press style front and a smooth back, which would be nice for gouache or acrylic or tests. The sheets are perforated for clean removal. Fabriano 1264 gives you 30 sheets of 7x10 paper, also perforated, for about $6.50 US. This paper is textured on both sides, and it's also perforated for clean removal from the pad. Fabriano states that this paper is an FSC renewable mix made with 60% renewable hydropower, and that the paper is acid-free, lignin-free, and buffered with calcium carbonate. Canson simply states that Montval is acid-free without any elaboration or details. Now, our swatches only tell part of the story, of course. The only way to truly get to know paper is through making a painting. Painting a small but developed painting on each paper, Montval was light years ahead of the Fabriano, which is a shame because I really appreciate the degree to which Fabriano is standing behind sustainable practices and archival stability, even in this mid-tier product range. The Montval provided a smooth and fluid environment for my wet-in-wet editions to run together. It was capable of careful lifting to some degree, and it allowed subtle and light color layering. It's what you hope for in a mid-priced, mid-level paper. It's a little workable, but not too much, encouraging a loose get in and get out of there before long approach. The surface is smooth enough that it's going to like pen and ink, and it's textured enough that you can build up a few values. Part of the reason I don't love my painting on the 1264 is because the paper seemed to dare me to throw more at it, so I wound up going dark and attempting some lifts, some sponge texture, and some truly darker layering. The colors don't mind layering, but they really don't like meeting up. There seems to be some stop between every brush stroke as the paper vacuums up every drop of water on contact. Fabriano uses a vegan sizing, but whatever it is, it doesn't seem to perform the function of a sizing at all. It just grabs up the water on contact. Part of my distaste for the paper is also due to a kind of obnoxious texture. Fabriano's quote-unquote cold press in this case is a uniform, pitting-like, obviously machine-added texture, which feels a little bit like painting onto perforated leather. Now, that said, I don't hate this sketchbook at all. It's a nice, acid-free mixed media weight paper with some potential for gouache and acrylic and collage. It's a definite step up from Fabriano's studio paper, which tends to pill if you just look at your water. I really like the 7x10 size, and I always feel a little bit squished in that 5x5 width of the smaller Montval book. I think that 1264 has some really nice things going for it, but I think that the paper would have to offer me more in the way of smoothness and sizing to be on par with the Montval. Both of these papers are also available in a 9x12 book with perforated pages, 20 sheets for Montval and 30 for 1264. These 9x12 spiral-bound books are each priced at around $10 at Blick. So I hope that that is informative. Note, I am not an affiliate, and I am not in any kind of reciprocal relationship with either of these brands. These are just my opinions based on my experience and how these materials serve my type of painting. So those are my impressions of Canson Montval and Fabriano 1264. Have you used either of these papers? Is the Fabriano 1264 a new product for you too, or am I just late to the game? Do you feel as though they're overpriced for what they are, or priced pretty much on target for what they are? What's your favorite paper? And notice whether or not it's the same as your most used paper, because for me, those are different things. I'd love to know what you think down below, and if this has been at all helpful, hit like and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.